So, a very warm welcome to this session, which is all about market research and customer discovery and how knowledge exchange professionals can support their potential spin-outs and their spin-outs in carrying this out. As people trickle in, I just needed to remind everybody that this session is being recorded. So, if you feel the need to turn your camera off, feel free. Then afterwards, the slides will be available in PDF format for anybody that would like them. The slides are reasonably wordy, but I've done that on purpose because quite often when I present, I just put, one word on a slide and talk around it. But I feel like actually this is quite useful for you guys to have, as a sort of a takeaway document as well, which is why the slides are reasonably wordy. So I reckon we will give it about another few seconds and then we will kick off. Jack, Devora, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear everything all right and we're all in good shape? Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, and likewise, Jack, Devora, you can see my slides okay now? Yep, fantastic. Okay, well, it is 2 minutes past the hour, so we will kick off. What I'm going to do is do a bit of chatting about what this is all about, and then I will probably stop after a little bit, and Devora is going to field any questions. If you have any questions, please pop them in the chat, and Devora will be very kindly looking at the chat every now and again because I cannot see that on my slides and talk to everybody at the same time. So let's get going. So just a tiny bit about me. My name is Nikki Dibben. I work for myself and I have done for the past 26 years. And I am a computer scientist turned intellectual property manager, turned marketer, turned advisor. I've been working in high tech and deep tech my entire life. Although much of what we're going to cover today is also relevant to those of you sort of in the sort of shape side of things as well. This is not just specific to technology. And my specialist subject really is everything marketing with a capital M, as I like to call it, all four P's: product, price, place, and promotion for high tech and deep tech companies. To cover the entire spectrum from university spin-outs all the way through to corporates. I've worked with Motorola, Vodafone, Fujitsu, some big names, as well as lots of spin-outs. But my favorite thing to do really is to work with the really early stage potential spin-outs and spin-outs. And I support a lot of the universities over here in the UK, from Cambridge to Leeds to Sheffield to Manchester and beyond. So with that being said, let's kick off. It would be really useful if my slides would move forward. There we go. So just to set the scene really, what's it all about? And I think it's really useful that we quite often sort of think about let's develop a product and then see what people, think about it. And actually, it's never too early to think about your customers and your applications and your markets. And this is especially true when you're in a technology or a deep tech field where really you've got a technology which is quite agnostic and you're figuring out what to do with it. You've already spent 10, 12, 15 years in the lab making this technology awesome. Um, you don't just want to go straight out there. You need to actually figure out what you should actually how you should take your technology into product and into the market. So it's never too early to start thinking about your customers. And the other point here really is with deep tech, especially, it is quite often quite literally a solution seeking a problem. So we've always been told find out what your customer pain points are, exacerbate them, only develop products when you know what your customer pain points are. And that's not always true in a deep tech world where literally you've got the technology and you're thinking, what can we do with it? So really, in this case, you're creating markets, you're educating markets, you're serving markets. So all this stuff about who should we be serving? What should we be doing? It's never too early to think about this. So when we're sitting here going, we've got this technology, the reason we do all this market research and customer discovery is to figure out, what our products should actually look like, how we should prioritize applications and markets, because again, we've got all these different markets we could be going into. One of my favorite examples is a while ago, I was working with some guys who had a really sexy plastic, and when you stretched it, it got stronger instead of weaker. And they're kind of going, well, we can be in the leading edge of wind turbine blades, and we can be on foldable mobile phone screens. And I'm going, yeah, not in the same sentence. So this stuff, when you've got technology, it's really, really important to really think about what are the markets we should be going after, how do we evaluate them, how do we prioritize them. And again, looking at what the problems and pain points are of our potential customers. And quite often, there are pain points and problems that they didn't even really know they had because you're going out there with a solution they didn't realize was a thing. So this is why we do all of this really, just so that we don't waste time, effort, energy, money, and all those things in doing all the wrong things. So what I want to cover first really is some of the principles of the whole idea of market research and customer discovery, and the fact that they are actually two different disciplines. Customer discovery is kind of a subset of market research, but the two of them are different, and we use them for different things. So let's look at market research. So market research is basically what would be happening in the world even if we weren't there. It's looking at what's going on outside of us. And this is where we have to objectively look at what's going on in the markets, what are the best opportunities, what don't we know, what's going on. And this is what I referred to back in the previous slide. You know, quite often we just develop these products without any recourse to the outside world, and then we think, oops, and we go out there into the real world and nobody wants them. And this is where we talk about the differences between market research and customer discovery. So what it really is it's market research, as I said, that's what's going on in the market, even if we're not there. It's quite often big picture stuff, it's market reports, it's generic, as it because it's what's going on there, whether we're there or not. It is in theory objective. If you read a market report, you should be able to trust the numbers in it. It's been developed by people other than ourselves. Quite often this market research is in the public domain. So, you know, Google and all that good stuff is our friend here. Sometimes, yes, we have to pay for market reports, but in general, you can find out enough about what's going on from the public domain. Quite often it's consolidated, so you will just get lots of opinions consolidated into one market report. So really, this is about what does the world look like, regardless of us being in it. Then we flip to the other side, which is the customer discovery side of things. And that is where we start thinking about, well, where do we fit into this market? What do our customers want? So this is where we start to zoom in on specific markets and specific customers. We can be a lot more subjective, and we can get a lot more subjective input because we're asking people, what do they feel? What do they think? What do they want? What do they don't want, etc. It's usually privately acquired. By that, I mean, you will either, get somebody to go out and do it for you, or you will be doing it yourselves. And it's quite often individual. So yes, we collate it, but in terms of collecting customer discovery, we'll be talking to one customer, then another customer, then another customer. So it's on an individual basis rather than being consolidated into one big opinion. So the market research, it's not about us, and customer discovery is. But what they both have in common is that they're all about gathering data, they're all about analyzing that data, and they're all about making the decisions as to what we want to do with our business. So this is how we combine the two. So really we can start with some market research to look at, well, what are the opportunities here? What do we see? Where do we see the gaps? What's happening in the market? Where do we think we can fit in? And then we go into customer discovery. Okay, well, what should therefore we be offering this market? What do people actually want from us? How can we shape this? Okay, then we can start to make some product decisions. And then we could flip it back to looking at the market again. What's actually going on? What's the competition doing? What levels do we need to compete? Direct competition, indirect competition, etc. And that's again, independent. And then we flip it back around to customer discovery. Well, how is our messaging landing? Do people like what we're saying? How does it resonate, and so on? So that's how we combine the two together. So what do we want to be getting from this market research? So some of the questions that we need to be answering are really, what are the markets in which we could compete? Then how big is the market? What are the trends in the market? Sometimes trends are actually more useful than market size. And I could do a minor segue on market size here, which is actually there's the whole, we need to do the TAM, SAM, SOM stuff for a market size. But actually, if you're going out into the market with a technology and you're creating a market, you can't just get a market report that says, the market for AI enabled, pipe degunkers for the water industry is X. You're creating this market. So you need to do the market research to figure out what the trends are, what's happening in the water market in general, how people look after their pipes in general, what the other technologies are that they use, etc. And then we size our market that way. We can look at what are the best and our or biggest applications for our technology, because again, best and biggest, not necessarily the same. Or we can look at what's the competitive environment looking like? What are other people doing? What's our direct competition? What's our indirect competition, etc. And then possibly most importantly, has what we're doing already been done? And that's sometimes we sometimes forget to answer. But really, the whole point about market research is looking at what the world looks like and figuring out then, okay, we've gathered all this data. How do we figure out, how we then compete in the market? So there are four ways we can look at market research. So there are two axes here upon which we look at them. Now we need all of this. So we'll start with looking at secondary and primary. So ironically, secondary market research comes before primary market research, even though that may not necessarily be logical. So the secondary market research is the stuff that we can do, on our own at a computer. It's looking at, what market research has been published, what are the publications in our industry, what are the conferences out there, what stats are available about our market and so on. This is the stuff we can gather without, leaving the house or picking up the phone. Then on the other side of things, there's the primary research, and this is the stuff that we carry out ourselves. Now, you can quite often the customer discovery side of stuff is mainly primary. Market research can be secondary or primary. So some of the primary research which is where we we're basically carrying it out ourselves. This is where we can do observation, we can do experimentation, we can do focus groups, whatever it might be, in-depth interviews and so on. But this is where we're figuring stuff out for ourselves. And so we can have to bear in mind it's also possible to do market research in a primary format, not just customer research. Then we split it on the other axis, which is quantitative versus qualitative. And then why do we need them both? Well, quantitative is all about numbers. How big is this market? How many people said that? What rate is a market growing? How many people out of a sample of 100, said X, Y, or Z? And so that's the number stuff, which is always very valuable. Then the other flip side of that is the qualitative stuff, and that's much more the thoughts, the opinions, where people have got strong opinions, etc. And that's the qualitative side of things. So we need both of those and we need to wrap them together, which is what I'm just about to come on and talk about. And the reason we do the secondary market research is that it fuels and it fact checks our primary research. Because if we just went out talking to a customer or looking at a market, not knowing what we want to ask, what hypotheses we're trying to check, what facts we want some qualitative opinions on, we're not gonna you're not gonna get very far. So we need both. And the reason we need both the qualitative and the quantitative is because of the fact that the qualitative stuff, that's all about open conversations. It's about diverging, it's about asking people what their opinions are, what they think about this, what they've done about that, and we can figure out gaps and so on. And the quantitative stuff, as I said, much more number oriented, much more structured data. And the reason we need them both is because with qualitative, we can start seeing patterns and themes, and we can say we have 10 conversations and we go, oh, this is really interesting. Like 7 of those 10 people we spoke to mentioned this thing as being really important. Okay, let's delve into that, which with some more quantitative research. How can we start putting numbers to this? 7 out of 10 people said they thought it was interesting, but we don't really know why. Let's see how strongly they feel about it. Let's get some numbers to back that up. Let's ask 1,000 people how strongly they feel about this topic, which our people have identified, and get some numbers. Then on the other hand, when you start doing quantitative, you can get some really strong opinions. If you do a questionnaire about what do people care about, you might realize that so many people say this particular thing is really, 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 really important, but you don't really know why and you don't really know what to do with that. So you can then delve into that with some qualitative stuff. So you can say, right, you had a really strong opinion on this, you scored it 9 out of 10. Why is that? What does that mean? What else should I know, etc. So we need them both and we iterate between them. Because if we only have the qualitative stuff, we can't really prioritize and rank all the information that we've gathered because we've just got loads and loads of data there. Somebody's got their microphone on, by the way. If people could be muted, that would be really handy because I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Thank you. And if we only do the quantitative stuff, then we miss some of the inputs and we miss some of the nuances that we just get with numbers because we don't understand the whys and the wherefores. So what should we be? We've talked about market research, and now, so moving on to the customer discovery side of things. So some of the reason for doing customer discovery, as I said, the market research is objective and it's what happens when we're not in the room. Now, customer discovery is much more, what the customers actually want from us. How do they talk about their problems? And how do they, what do they want from our products? If we go out with a hypothesis of, what we think we should be offering, how do they think about that? What additional applications do they identify? We might say we think we can use our technology in these three ways. They might go, oh yeah, but I've got a way that's halfway between ways one and two, or I've got ways four and five. And we go, oh, actually, we hadn't thought about that. How do they expect to buy? What's the customer journey here? So really, customer discovery is, as I said, it's about us, but it also isn't about us because it is primarily about our customers. What do they want, and then how do we reflect that onto what we're actually doing with our business and shaping and designing our business. So I hope that makes sense so far. Devor, have any questions popped in, or is everybody being thoroughly just listening?
Uh, no questions yet, but again, I'd like to encourage everyone to pop them in because I'm keeping a close eye.
Fantastic. Okay. So this is good. So now we get on to some of the real world practicalities. So what I did there really was just chat about some of the textbooky stuff, if you like, as to the different types of market research and why it's important to combine both the market research side of things and the customer discovery side of things to start making progress, and how we iterate between them all. There's so much more that can go on there. And when I was doing my marketing degree a while back, I did a 6-month module just on market research. And then I liked it so much, I did a certificate in market research, which was a whole lot of 6 months of market research. So I did study market research for an entire 12 months. So I'm fully aware that this is a real skim over textbook land, but this is hopefully why the questions start to get, will hopefully start to get interesting, because then we can dive into whatever it is you want to dive into. So we've got the theory. So how do we then, turn that into the real world practicalities of actually doing this? Just here we go. So the approach to market research, this is what I call the kind of the backwards market research side of things. So there's no point in just going out to the market, right? We need to figure out, what decisions do we need to make? So are we talking about product decisions, or how we're going to form our company, or what our routes to market are going to be, etc. So once we know what decisions we need to make, we then work back from that. Okay, therefore, what information do we need to gather in order to make those decisions? And once we know what information we need to gather, we then go, okay, what are the most appropriate sources and who are the people that we need to be speaking to? So, for instance, in the case of, coming out of academia, it could be that we actually want to be speaking to a lot of the, academic leaders in the field. It could be we want to speak to industry leaders. It could be that really we want to speak to, analysts in the market to get their views on it. But all of that should be designed in order to give us the information we need in order to make the decisions that we need to make. And then once we know what the appropriate sources and people are and what information we need to gather, we then look at what techniques are best. So for instance, if we know that we're still sort of in a very early stage and we don't even really know, what products we need to be developing, then, going out to 1,000 people with a questionnaire, it's probably not going to be of an awful lot of use to us because we don't even really know what questions we want to be asking at that point. It's much more likely to be, okay, let's pick a dozen people and actually have some in-depth interviews with those people. Then we'll figure out what that means, then what we need to do in terms of customer discovery, then we can go back to market research, and then later we can go back and do, once we've got a better hypothesis formed, we can go back out into the market. And it's really important to remember that all of this market research it's just telling us, what's out there. We still need to make some decisions. We still need to spot the gaps. We still need to, apply some intellectual rigor to what it is we need to be doing going forwards. So looking at again in the real world, how do we apply these market research techniques? So it's really useful to combine a variety. We've already talked about, combining the qualitative and the quantitative. And the same is true here. We can't just do, spend 10 hours, Googling stuff and then throwing it into our, AI platform of choice and go, hey, right, we understand this market perfectly. We need to combine the qualitative and the quantitative. We need to combine the primary and the secondary. And then there's what I call the closed envelope theory. And this was taught to me really, really early in my career when I was literally doing a job where we had to match crazy academic inventions to the real world. And we had to telephone and fax, yes, those were the days, data sheets, out to industry experts and to people in the commercial world. And one of the things that we were always taught to do when we finished an interview with somebody was say, who else should I speak to? And then we would write down their names. And then we would make a point of contacting all of those people. And at the end of that, we'd say, who else should I speak to? And actually, you do relatively quickly. And I believe this to be true even in today's age. You will get to a point where if you're trying to talk to the experts in a market, you'll very quickly get to where everybody you speak to refers you back to the people you've already spoken to. And then you get this closed envelope, and you know that you've got a pretty good understanding of what's going on in that market then. Yep, don't be very afraid of multiple sources of the same data. Now, what we mean by this is you might have, one market report might go the market's worth 4 billion, one might go it's worth 2 billion, one might go it's worth this, it's worth the other, or there are 10 players or there are 12 players. Don't we shouldn't let that stress us out because again, even though market research is supposed to be objective, people will slice and dice the data in different ways. And it's up to us to go, actually, how do we make sense of this? But more importantly, how do we apply it to ourselves? And actually, do we care whether the market's worth 4 billion or 4.5 billion? It's big enough, right? Jobs are good. Which then leads us to the next point. We have to be really important that we set some deadlines, we allocate some resources, and we avoid going down rabbit holes. And what I mean by this is it's really easy to let one little quirky thing sidetrack you and you just go off exploring that forever and forget that your job is actually to get an understanding of the market as a whole. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't make a point of noting what those little quirks are, and sometimes they will be the interesting bits that we do want to come back to later. But what I am saying is just bear in mind the overall objectives. As I said, when you're up to your backside in alligators, it's hard to remember that your objective was to drain the swamp. And we kind of need to bear that in mind here as well, in that really it's like, what are we actually trying to achieve? And then we have to remember that we need to iterate here. So this is not one and done. We're always iterating between the market research, the customer discovery, going back to market research, and so on. So in the real world, that all sounds all well and good, but what are the common things that people, tend to complain about really? So these are some of the most common objections which we get. We get, I don't want to waste people's time. Well, okay, but if somebody, agreed to a conversation, chances are they don't have a problem with they're giving you their opinions. I don't like asking for help. Well, again, we're not asking for help. We're asking to have conversations with people. I don't know what to ask. Well, okay, this is why we do our secondary market research. This is why we figure out what we want to ask. We go out into the market with not a rigorous script, but we need to know enough questions that will guide a qualitative conversation. And we need to, there's nothing worse than if you say ask a question, somebody says something really interesting. Don't go, okay, question two.
It's
Find a way
true.
to carry on the conversation. So if they kind of go, blah, blah, well, when I was in hospital, and you go, oh, hospital, just repeat back the last word or two that somebody said with a question mark at the end, they'll carry on talking. So you need to balance, having a script with actually letting the conversations go where they want to go. I might have to change my beliefs. I don't know what they're going to say. Well, that's kind of the point, right? If we knew what everybody was going to say and what everybody's thoughts were and what was going on in the market, then we wouldn't be doing any of this in the first place. So again, we're going out into the market with hypotheses here, and then we're trying to prove or disprove or further enhance those hypotheses as we develop our products in the real world. And then one of the most important things, and this is a really good book here, which my Captain Elmo is hanging on to, but it's a book called Ask. And the most important thing that I took out of this book, people cannot tell you what they want. They can only tell you what they don't want and what they've done before. So I always liken this to tea in my house. If you say, what do you want for tea or what do you want for dinner? Everybody's like, well, I don't know. Whereas if you go, well, do you want Chinese? No. Well, do you want Italian? No. Okay, well, do you want steak? No, we had that last night. So people can tell you what they don't want, and they can tell you what they did last night and what they've done before, but they can't tell you what they want. So that's why when you're asking questions, it's about framing the questions in such a way that you actually get the information that you need. So there's some of the common objections, and these are the sorts of things that when you're working with your cohorts and with your potential spin outs, this is worth mentioning to them. These are the common objections. You kind of have to feel the fear and do it anyway, really. So how do we overcome these objections, right? We say, well, what's the worst that could happen, right? You speak to somebody and they go, I don't want to speak to you, or they don't turn up for the meeting. It's fear. And the other thing that really, really to remember, it's conversations, not conversions. So again, we are listening here. We are not selling, we are not pitching, we are asking questions and we're having conversations. And we're making notes, not promises. I think that's the other thing to really bear in mind because we're just saying, oh, one of the objections is, well, I might be told what I don't want to hear. I might have to pivot my product. Well, okay, if you get enough data coming in that leads you to pivot, then so be it. But your strategy is not the last thing the last person said to you in the last meeting. So just because somebody says, well, it'd be really nice if this product does X, that doesn't mean you're pivoting your strategy. You're making notes at this point. You're making lists, you're making calls, you're making notes, you're not making any promises. And be happy to diverge. I mean, this sounds some when you start this, it's really scary because you'll have two or three conversations and they'll all be really, really, really different. But the longer we do this, patterns do emerge. And this is where we will come on to in a moment. And so this is again sort of reassuring the spin outs that, it's all good. And then, as we were saying, the overlap between market research and customer discovery is that we can use our market research techniques in our customer discovery process. So we can use focus groups for both market research and customer discovery. We can use questionnaires for both market research and customer discovery. And again, I'm saying ask for referrals. When you've spoken to somebody, ask them who else you should be speaking to. And where do we start? Because I know this sounds, we've said we sort of start with we start with what decisions we need to make and therefore what information we need to gather. We start with some of our secondary market research. But when we start going out there into the real world, it can be really, really scary. And so the advice that I always give is, just start anywhere and start small. Have a couple of conversations, enter a few more conversations, and it does start to we do start to see some patterns, we start to see some trends, we start to see some themes. And then again, this is where we go, okay, qualitatively, these themes are emerging. How do we dive into that quantitatively? Okay, quantitatively, these numbers and these strong opinions are emerging. How do we then move that back into the qualitative side of things and figure out the whys, the wheres, and so on? And again, it's about, keeping the faith and trusting the process. And I know this sounds a bit cheesy, but on the other hand, it's really important to realize that the more you get out there and the more you start talking to people, the process kind of, takes care of itself. So how are we doing on the chat? Any questions yet, Devora, or have I lulled everybody into silence?
Yes, we do. No, no, no. We have a great question from Mohammed. Which is better? Should universities do this market and customer search themselves, or should they?
Oh, you've muted yourself, Deborah. Sorry, I only heard the first half of that.
Oh, let me try it again. Which is better? Should universities do this market and customer research themselves, or should they outsource this work?
Well, neither. The spin-outs themselves should do it. So the university, and I'm going to come on to this when we sort of close up at the end, Mohammed, which is it's all about, how can universities support? So it is the fundamental responsibility of your potential spin out who's going to go out into the big, wide, dangerous world. This is their job. So it's not your job as a knowledge exchange body or a tech transfer office. It's not your job to do it for them. Nor can it be outsourced because you can't really. And funny, I was doing this last week. I was doing like 10 mentoring sessions back to back with one of the universities up here. And that was what somebody was saying. I've only got £5,000 to spend, which was about €6,000 these days, I think. I should have, well, should I outsource a market research study? And I'm like, no, because A, this is your job. B, you're at a very early stage. So if you outsource that market research, you still don't really know what you're asking. The only time really to outsource anything like this would be when you are sure enough in what you think you want to be doing and you want to back it up with some really solid numbers. So when you know these are the five things that I want people to score from 0 to 10, and I want 1,000 people to do that for me, that's when you can think about outsourcing something because it will literally be a questionnaire with some yes, no's or some score from 0 to 10. Some sort of agency can do that for you because that's kind of just admin at that point in time. But really, it is the responsibility of, yes, not the university and not to be outsourced, but this is the job of your spin outs themselves to be doing this because they're the ones that are going to be running this company. They're going to be the ones that, need to live and breathe and own this stuff.
Great. Well, we have a follow-up question from Sandra. What support should the KTO be giving to the market research done by the spinoff?
Support in terms of money, in terms of people, in terms of hugs. I mean, it's
I think it's just simply support. And I would
yeah,
go for
I
all of
think
that because, to be honest, I'd like to know that myself.
yeah. That's where it gets really tricky, and I think it comes down to the resources available. So I do think, and saying, you know, when we get to the summary, it's their responsibility. So to me, it's about setting the ground rules, and providing some support. So when we come to the summary slide, we're going to have quite a bit about, well, not quite a bit, 5 bullet points, you know, about how you should be supporting them. But as much as anything, I think it's about providing the environment in which, you know, if they've got any questions, they can come to you. So this is kind of why this is sort of setting the scene in terms of you guys hopefully knowing a bit more about what it all looks like. So then, so as much as anything, you know, pass this on to them. You know, let me have a session with all of them at once and ask all that, you know, answer all their questions, because you can't support every single thing they're doing. So yes, they're going to want support with market research. Then they're going to want support with customer discovery. Then they're going to want, you know, support with patent searches. Then they're going to want support with, you know, company structures. Then they're going to want support with the HR. Then they're going to want support with the finances. And, you know, it's your job to provide the environment in which they feel supported to do all of this stuff, but you can't do it all for them. So to me, it's about getting that balance right. And any resources that you've got that you can share, you know, absolutely do that. Any sort of group-based, you know, as I said, training and stuff like that that you can do, absolutely, you know, provide some recommended reading. But I think, you know, this just for that what I'm covering here is just like probably like 1% of their job as a spin out. And so you can only give them so much support. So really it is kind of up to them really.
Excellent. Now we have a question from Christina. How should we do customer and market research for medical applications, such as drug development, where many biotechs end up being purchased by big pharma companies? Does this mean that my customer should be a pharma company from the outset?
Okay, so the answer is going to be it depends, because of course the answer to every good question is it depends. So that's where it gets really tricky, because it again it comes back down to what decisions are you trying to make. So if you're trying to make the decision of should I be setting up a manufacturing plant to make, you know, medical stuff, or am I only ever going to want to license this technology out? Do I think I want to set up a company to the point where somebody's going to be really interested in acquiring it, or do I really not want to go down that path and literally get, you know, license, you know, my secret sauce and my recipes? So I think it comes down to what decisions you're going to want to make. Then of course you add to that the extra sort of nuance there, and a lot of the medical stuff is actually a lot of medical things can actually decide not to be medical things but be consumer things instead. So as an example, I'd one cohort that was sort of doing a like a diabetes watch effectively, you know, and their opening line was, you know, well, Apple is going to buy us. And then they went to, oh no, Procter and Gamble's going to buy us. And then they went to, oh, Philips Healthcare is going to buy us. And I'm like, okay, well, firstly, you know, why are you planning your exit when we haven't even planned your entry, right? You know, you're jumping out of windows when we haven't even built a foundation or walls or decorated the walls or put any windows in. So why are you trying to, you know, jump out of windows just yet? So they could have been either a medical device or a consumer device. So the reason the answer is it depends is it's very much, I think about what are the hypotheses of the routes we could take. This is where we're at with a biotech discovery slash technology. Okay, let's look at the you know, the potential routes might be license where we're at and do nothing else with it, spin out the company to a point where it's much more attractive to somebody to actually purchase, at which point the people we want to be talking to are those guys, or take the company, you know, much further along. So to my mind, at this point in time, it's the market research side of things, which I think is going to be much more powerful than the customer discovery side of things, because your market research, I think, will lead you to understand more what's going on in the market, what have similar technologies done, not done, where were they successful, where were they not successful. And I think it's about gathering all that objective stuff, and then you'll be able to go, okay, therefore we think this is the approach we're going to take. That right, so therefore we've improved our hypothesis to say we're not going to, you know, go full tilt and make this, you know, a spin out that we take to the point where we're manufacturing and shipping drugs. So the other two options are where we're at. Okay, in terms of customers, then we map out our ecosystem and we go, okay, well, maybe our customers are the medical people, or maybe our customers are the hospitals, or maybe our customers are the doctors. What does the entire supply chain of the market look like? And then who can we be getting the most useful information out of? So are our customers, the companies that we want to acquire us, or are they really, if we view that company that might want to acquire us as just a step in our supply chain, who are our customers one level further on, and what do they want and what do they need? At which point the people that we think might acquire us, or they might be one step in our supply chain. So that's why really sort of mapping out what your ecosystem looks like as a whole, because then you can figure out who are our direct customers, who are our indirect customers, what are our routes to market. So customer in its broadest sense can be everything from the end user, and then all of the links in the chain between you and them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that was the, oh, yes, someone, Christina just said yes, and I agree. I was actually taking some notes. I thought that was really exciting. I would actually like to ask a follow-on question. Hopefully we have time. I'll make it real quick. So, Nikki, you were mentioning that if you're considering the market discovery, say map out the ecosystem, look at the supply chain. Let's suppose you've done all that and the market research, and now you have markets which are radically different. I mean, even more different than the example that you brought up. Like maybe there's a coating that could work for food processing tubes or as a coating in a stent to keep, blood vessels open. Totally different. How could someone approach that?
Okay. So this is then where you need to start evaluating your markets. So you need to think about what are the criteria that matter. So they might be how many players are there in the market? What's the level of competition? What are the alternatives? What does a successful deployment look like? What would the time to market be? So you look at, right, what are the 10 criteria that matter? And then look at each of those different vertical markets. So yeah, one might be food and beverage, one might be oil and mining, one might be medical, whatever, or even at the application level, and then rank them, from a score of 0 to 10 in each of those and add them up. So it could be that actually your medical thing, you're going, oh, well, in terms of, the size of the market, that scores 10 out of 10. But if everything else scores like 1 or 2, then that market as a whole might only score you like 20 out of 100. Whereas your food and beverage one might score you a 6 and a 6 and a 5 and a 4. But overall, oh, that might be like 53 out of 100. So it's about figuring out what are the criteria and how does the market as a whole, how does the attractiveness of the market as a whole shape up? And that's then when we can figure out what our beachhead markets are. So again, it's like the whole, oh, we're going to sell to Apple. Well, that's like either going to work or it's not going to work. There's not really a middle ground to be had there. So it's about looking at what are your beachhead markets. They need to be big enough that you can get a foothold in, and be worthy of getting a foothold in, but small enough that you can get said foothold in. So that's why sort of analyzing those markets like that is really, really useful, and the answer is always somewhere in the middle. Because on the one hand, if you're always saying we're going to make one sale to a massive company, well, that's like win or lose. But at the same time, you don't want to be, so if you imagine like 1,000 to thousands, right? So at the top, it might be 1 million, but there's only one chance of it. Or at the bottom, you might have like 1 million customers, but just $1 each. Well, there's a lot of infrastructure that's involved in that. The right answer is probably somewhere in the middle, where you have 1,000 customers of 1,000 each. So that's sort of how you can, so your beachhead markets are where you want to be looking at there, really. And also looking at sort of slightly higher level messaging. So if you're still experimenting with 2 or 3 different markets, what is the higher level messaging that's still applicable to all of those markets? And you can use that while you're shaping your hypotheses. So, for instance, whether you're food and beverage or whether you're medical, it might be the cost that's important to everybody, or it might be the speed of deployment that's important to everybody. And if you can get your messaging at a high enough level, then you can still play with different vertical markets while you're figuring out exactly where you want to be going.
Excellent. That was great. And now David has a follow-on question. Shouldn't market size be the number of units or clients times the price per unit or client?
Right, so that's the market that you feel you can get. So yeah, and this is why I'm saying market sizing is really, really interesting, because on the one hand you read a market report and it goes 4 billion. Right. So to me, the way we do market sizing, especially in deep tech land, is we can look at the top level numbers which come from the public domain, 4 billion, 3 billion, 8 trillion, whatever. But then yes, we then build our market sizing, which is the market we think we can get from the bottom up. So we go, yes, we feel that a deployment looks like this and will cost this, and we feel like we can get that many of them. And we build it from the bottom up and the top down, and we make them meet in the middle. So as an example, if we kind of go, oh, the top level figures of the market was worth 4 billion, but we know there's only like 14 players in this space and they're only going to want three each, and that's only going to be like 42, and then they're only going to be this size of a deployment. That doesn't relate to the 4 billion. Something's wrong here. So yeah, it's about building it from the bottom up and the top down, and making them meet in the middle, rather than going, oh, the market's 4 billion, so if we only get 1% of this, we'll be really happy. I mean, that's of no use to anybody. So that 1% doesn't need to be the 1%. That 1% needs to be, we will get this, we our market will be this, because we're going to make this many sales to this many people. And by the way, that only happens to represent 1 or 5% of what the big figures seem to say the market is, so it makes sense.
Great. Well, that was the last question for this section. Thanks.
Fabulous. That's good. I will spin on to a few more slides then. They were fabulous questions. Thank you. I always love the questions. So how do we combine and iterate this? We sort of referenced this before, but it's really worth sort of coming back to what this really looks like. So with the market research and customer discovery, it's really important to allow the time to diverge. So with our initial round of market research, we're going to be going out there and we are going to be diverging. We're going to be getting loads of information. We're not sure what we're going to do with it. We're going to end up with, 1,000 post-it notes scattered all over the office, minor panic attacks. But that's where we use the closed envelope theory, and where we think, okay, right, we've got enough patterns, enough trends, enough data, that now we're going to stop and we're going to actually look at all this and go, okay, let's make some strategic decisions, right? We can maybe exclude some things. We can maybe use this market research to pick 2 or 3 beachhead markets out of our potential list of 26 applications. Maybe our market research said, actually, these are the 3 or 4 that look most promising. So we're going to make some market decisions, like what markets are we going to compete in? What do we think our beachhead markets are going to be? That'd be one example of how we're going to converge on all this data that we've gathered. Then we can move into the customer discovery phase. But then again, we're diverging. So we're going out to the world with a hypothesis of, we think this is going to be our product and we think this is what we're going to be offering. Let's see what our potential customers think about this. So again, we're diverging. We're going, what do you like? What do you not like? What have we said? What have we not said? What features, additional features, might you find interesting, etc. So again, we're diverging, and we might have, as many applications as we thought of, and then 100 more. Then we analyze these. So again, that's where we kind of go, okay, what are the trends? What are the patterns? What are the commonalities? What are we seeing here? And we analyze that, and then we make some converging decisions. Now, this book is a little bit interesting, because on the one hand, you don't want to just go, oh, well, 12 out of our 15 people said this, or 98 out of our 102 people said that. Do bear in mind what the little tiny quirks are, because sometimes the little tiny quirks might just spark something amazing in your world that is the way forward. But in general, you're sort of going out into this world with something, you're looking at what the market's doing, and you kind of want to make them meet in the middle. So to a certain extent, you can ignore the outliers because you've gathered this data yourself. It's not like you've sort of asked, ChatGPT to summarize 12 books, right? Because if you ask ChatGPT to summarize 12 books, you're just going to get a straight line through them, right? You're not going to see the nuances and the outliers. But with doing your own customer discovery, you will see enough that you know which outliers are going to be important and which ones aren't. So then you make some customer decisions, and you converge on those. Okay, we had 12 product features. These are the 4 we're going to prioritize. These are the 4 we're going to shelve. These are the 4 we're going to come back to later. And then we go back round again, and we iterate. So we can then go back and go, okay, now we come back round full circle. We think we know a bit more about our product. We think we know a bit more about our customers. We think we know a bit more about our market. What's the next level down? So we might have gone, the first round might have been, well, we're going to pick between water and oil and gas and utilities and transport and public safety. At the end of one round, we might go, okay, we think we're going to focus on water and oil and gas and utilities and nobody else. And we think our product's going to look like this. Actually, we now want to figure out, really, within the water industry and the oil and gas industry and the utilities industry, what are the specifics? And so you go back round and get, in more depth every time. So what do we do with this? So we've done a round of market research. So how do we get through this diverging here? We look at the patterns, we look at the trends, we look at what's been repeated, we look at some of the contradictions. So again, we're still going to have contradictions, we're still going to have gaps, we're still going to have bits that don't make sense. So then how can we use this to design customer discovery? We look at the market and we go, somebody says this is really important. Oh, somebody says that's really important. Those two cannot hold true simultaneously. Well, okay, that's something we need to then figure out. Can we use that in customer discovery or in our next round of market research, etc.? What could we do better? What happened with our interviews? How should we revise any questionnaires or interviews that we used? How can it be better next time around? So what do we do with it? We've got all this data, so we use it as, input to our strategic decision making. And then there's a balancing act here because on the one hand, it's our job to challenge the status quo. This is the way the world's always done things, but we think we can do it better, so we're going to challenge it. But on the other hand, don't ignore it because, inertia is one of your main competitors if you're not careful. And there's quite often a reason that people have always done things the way they've always done things. So we need to balance that tension between challenging the status quo, but also not ignoring it. So when we're diverging, what new doors does this open for us? What are the markets we might not have seen before? What doors does it close? What are the markets we thought we were going to go into, but now we've decided, yeah, maybe not? What further questions do we need to answer? How have we improved our hypotheses? And how can we then move, from the hypotheses we've developed in our market research to then test out with actual customers? So again, it's like, as I said, there's this tension here because on the one hand, it's a sanity check. On the other hand, it's just open-ended exploration of, what's going on there. And then when we've done some customer discovery, again, what do we do with this? How are we gonna converge? So we get to figure out, what do our customers actually need? Does our value proposition make sense? Does our offering make sense? And again, I referred to this a little bit earlier. It's getting the balance right because it's all input to product development. But we can't just pivot every time somebody says something that's new to us. So it's getting that balance right. It's making notes, not promises. It's making sure that what we're saying it is going to make sense. It's understanding the language that our customers use. So we might go out there and think that people talk about the problems in a certain way, and they talk about the problems in a completely different way. So this customer discovery is really important because we're getting inside the heads of our customers a lot more. And it can also identify some gaps where we need further market research. So we might find we've gone out saying we're going to do this market, and that market. And when we speak to potential customers, they might go, yeah, no, but what about that? Oh, okay, right. We've identified some more markets. Now we need to spin back around and look at the market research. And then what I want to do is one of my little sort of segue, but it's really, really important because customer discovery has a massive impact on messaging, especially for technology companies. So we always talk about our own technology. So I will guarantee pretty much 90% of the corporate websites you look at, they start with we this or our company name. And actually, it's not about you, it's about your customers. If you go to onto a consumer website, a clothing website, you don't see shirts, shoes, trousers. You see men, women, children. The first thing you should recognize is yourselves. So customer discovery, the impact of messaging is that it helps us put ourselves in the minds of our customers and make it about them. So just some little things here which are really useful to teach your potential spin outs is spell out an acronym. So the first time you use an acronym, spell it out. If I know what it is, I'm not going to be offended. If I don't know what it is, I'm going to be terribly grateful. Note what language the customers are using when they talk about their problems, and ask them to reflect, not repeat what you've said, because that way, if you say, oh, A, B, C, and they go A, B, C, then they've just repeated what you said. You don't even know if they understand it. Ask them to reflect back to you, and they might say, well, you gave us 3 letters of the alphabet, all in the right order, the first 3 letters, but actually, and then you get to use their language. And this is really, really, really important because the whole point of all of this is that it's never about what we want to tell our customers. It's about what they need to hear from us. And by doing this customer discovery, we can help get this kind of outside in approach rather than the inside out approach. And that's why we're going out into the market and figuring this stuff out, to take this outside in perspective. And then once we're out in the real world, how do we wrap this kind of discovery and this market research and this customer discovery into our actual sales process once we're out there selling much more? So we've got a hypothesis. We think we know what our messaging is. We think we know what our target audience is. So what do? Well, we go out there and we talk to customers and we figure out what they like, what they don't like, what they say, what they don't say. This could be through market research, through customer discovery, through a round of both. We then learn from that. We then go, okay, what did we learn? What are the findings here? And then we go, okay, well, how do we revisit our messaging? How do we revisit our customer profile? My favorite example of this is I had a client recently who had spent a lot of money, a lot of time on a sales consultant who was going, well, you need to slice and dice this, and you need to go out in this, and this is how your sales development, representatives need to go out and whatever. But they didn't have a sales problem, they had a marketing problem. Their messaging was shocking. And so what we did was every Friday we would come out with the latest messaging. Then the next week, the sales guys would go out with the new messaging. Then after 3 or 4 days, it was every Monday we went out with new messaging, apologies. Every Monday we go out with new messaging. During the week, the sales guys would do their thing. Every Friday, we'd come back and have a group meeting. What landed, what didn't land, what do people like, what do people not like? Over the weekend, I would refine the messaging and I would update the customer profile. And then on the Monday morning, the sales guys were good to go again. They went from getting zero meetings in 18 months to getting about 12 meetings in 6 weeks. This is with big corporates. So they got more meetings in I think 6 weeks than they'd had in 18 months because we just did this process where we tightened it. And so the tighter that your messaging gets, the bigger your audience can get. So as we go around this is actually a spiral rather than a circle. Our proposition gets tighter, our messaging gets tighter, our minimum viable product, we get that more tightly specced, our customer profile gets more tightly specced. And then the closer we are to something that's really quite good, the bigger our audience can get, and so on. So we spiral this in a really, really positive way. And I said, every conversation adds to the mix, but you do need some structure. And this is a really good way to structure that whole real world iteration side of things, actually make it into a process. Anything that isn't systematized will just get lost. So we are doing very well for time, so we will have time for questions. But really, I just wanted to summarize in terms of, and we discussed this briefly in the questions, how can you support your spin outs? So firstly, educate them on the basics. Then it's about reassuring them on the practicalities. And this is where we talked about, oh, but I don't know what to ask, and oh, I don't know how to make a list, and oh, I don't know how to, etc. Well, it's their job to do it. And there was a bullet point in the previous slide where I talked about bum glue, right? And what I mean by this is they have to sit on their chair and make lists and contact people and do the research and just get on with it. So that's what I mean in terms of the practicalities. It's their job to do it. And the practicalities are that some of this is really, really boring. It's about Googling stuff. It's about making lists. It's about going, who are the 100 players? Where do I find all these 100 players? Who do I need to talk to in these 100 players? How can I have all these conversations? Oh, now I'm looking people up on LinkedIn and now I'm emailing people. Well, that's what it takes in the real world. You actually have to do it. And then again, it's their responsibility and you can only support them up to a certain point. If these people aren't gonna go out and do this stuff, they probably have no business running a business in the real world, right? At which point you go, lovely, we're gonna have your technology and we're gonna license it out. If they want to have a spin out, it's their job to put all of these basic fundamentals into place. So it is absolutely their responsibility. Yes, you can provide some templates for them to use, like Hero Ideal questionnaires, some further reading. So like the Strategizer books, for instance, are very good at this. That Ask book by Ryan Levesque, which I mentioned, is good. And I'll also sort of, protect them from the wrong approaches. Now, what I mean by that really is, no, you may not just go put all your not even granted patent information into public domain chat GPT and say, hey, tell me what to do with this, right? Because not only have you just put all of your unprotected, intellectual capital into the public domain, but also it's your job to make those lateral leaps in thinking. What could all the approaches for our technology be? What are the products we could be doing? What are the gaps in the market? You're not going to chat GPT your way out of that, right? So it's about sort of, I think, protecting them from A, the wrong approaches, and B, themselves, being aware of what tools are useful and what tools aren't. And don't get me wrong, the chat GPT stuff can be useful for a lot of stuff. But A, it needs to be ring fenced, so it's private rather than public, and B, it's not going to help you just go, oh, so it's not going to help you see those sparks, which is what you really need to be successful. And then just to end, really, why? Well, why do we do any of this, right? Why don't we just go, here's our product, who wants to buy it? Well, we don't. We do this because we don't want to waste time, we don't want to waste money, we don't want to waste energy, we don't want to do the wrong things. So what all of this market research and customer discovery does is it informs us and it guides us and it helps us make those decisions. And then we flip our mindset. So we go from an inside out approach of like, here's our tech, who wants it, to an outside in approach. What's happening in the world and how can we get into those niches and those gaps and those sweet spots that will make us be successful? And how do we put ourselves in the mind of our customers in the context of our market? And so this is all the stuff that fuels your spin outs to help them get, stronger market ready businesses, which is really, what this is all about. So that was a real whistle stop tour through all of this. We might have time for a couple of questions. I do a lot of this, so this is something I deliver like even up to like a sort of a half day for a big cohort based thing. So if that's something any of you guys want me to chat to you about, I'm more than happy to send you details on a price list and all that good stuff, because this is what I spend a lot of my life doing. So, Devora, have we got any more questions as we're wrapping up? And that's my LinkedIn, by the way. I'm always more than happy. I think I'm the only Nikki Dibbon on LinkedIn if anybody wants to find me.
Excellent. I don't see any more questions at the moment, so I'd like to encourage everyone, though, to please put your questions in, because I've personally found the questions discussion to be super interesting.
Oh, it definitely is. I've lulled them all into, stunned them all into silence, Devorah. That's sometimes a good thing.
Well, I'm seeing a few thank yous. Oh, and now we have a question from
Oh, fantastic.
Michael. Yeah. Do you have any tips for academics to identify the right customers in industry?
Is this an academic when they're literally going, oh, here's my technology, blimey, what do I do with that? Um, yeah, in which case, I think what's interesting about academics is they normally have, on the one hand, they normally have this technology, but they also tend to have this vision. So they'll start with like, we're going to diagnose cancer in hours instead of weeks. And I'm going like, okay, right, that's a bold statement. And like, here's my technology. And what they normally lack is the sort of the gap in between the two. So there, it's really about, okay, so you do have this. If you ask most of them, they will have this grand vision statement, like we're going to revolutionize hip replacements with our shiny, lasered, whatevers, or this new plastic's going to be in every wind turbine blade in the world or whatever, or we're going to solve this particular really, really big burning problem. And so the trick is really helping them close the gap between those two extremes. So it's okay, well, look, you've got that vision. How do we break it down into steps? You've got this technology. How do we build it up into steps? And that comes back down to kind of like, mapping the ecosystem, sort of mapping the supply chain, and it really being, what does diagnosing cancer in hours instead of, weeks look like? Okay, well, what machines does your tech need to be in? Who uses those machines? Who sells those machines? Is this really feasible? And does this happen in hospitals, or does it happen in private clinics, or does it happen in, specialist cancer centers, or what does real world deployment look like? And so moving down from that level of, the massive vision, and then going, okay, well, look at the technology. How could we turn that into a product? So for instance, would we be selling a recipe so that people could just, put this into their own machines? Or do we have to build a machine that people can use? And if we build that machine, does it bolt onto other machines they already have, or is it a standalone machine? And what do we want our business to look like? Do we want to be selling machines, or do we want to be selling, um, things we make with the machine? And then in terms of identifying customers, once you've kind of mapped out all those layers, you probably need to be talking to people at all the different layers of that to then work out, well, where's the power lie in the supply chain, and where are the bottlenecks, and where are the gaps, and who are the people that can really make this real for me? And then you'll figure out, the technology flows and the money flows, and how do we make those two things meet in the middle? That would be my short and sweet advice for that one, I think.
Great. So we're getting in a few more thank yous, but I'd like to encourage folks to put in some more questions.
Yep, I think we have about 90 seconds left, so that's all good.
Oh, seeing a lot of thank yous. I'd like to add
Oh,
my
you're
own.
very
Thank you, Nikki.
Yes, you are very welcome. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. And as I said, I do this. This is kind of what I do for a living, right? As well as all the fun stuff. Because as you well all know, there's a lot of, pro bono involved in the university side of things. And so it's balancing doing all the pro bono stuff with all the other stuff. And it's nice, my own little sort of virtual circle, if you like. But yeah, I'm always more than happy to deliver my half-day version of this for massive cohorts. If anybody wants me to do that, I'm always available. And fantastic. I'm glad everybody enjoyed it. And yep, please do find me on LinkedIn. There's my email. And I talk about this stuff a lot because I do work with a lot of the universities, and I hope it's been helpful.